Um, okay, let's get started, guys. Thank you so much for joining us to How We Build This. This is our third mastermind, and we are so excited to have you again, guys. I'm really excited about that. So How We Build This, the city building version. It's a webinar series featuring Toronto's most innovative leaders and the story behind the movement they built. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. My co-host and friend is Lirad Kligman, the co-founder of the Yorkville team, a residential and commercial sales team in Toronto. We started this mastermind series to get a chance to ask questions that usually are not taught or discussed, not in school, not probably in your first decade of employment. And we are so excited to have Jane Farrow with us today.
Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you, Lira. Thank you, Nama. I'm honored to be here.
So, Jane, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background about who you are. I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar, but to go into a little bit depth. So, Jane Farrow is a Canadian author, broadcaster, and community organizer. She draws on a strong background in journalism and community organizing, and she brings people together for constructive dialogue and creative city building initiatives. Jane was the founding director of Jane's Walk, and her broad set of experiences range from CBC journalist, researcher, advisor, to City Hall staffer and community facilitator, having done consultation and facilitation work for a range of institutions, provincial ministries, and municipalities. So, to start off with, let's go into a bit of a background. It's a lot of different roles, a lot of different jobs, and very diverse set of experiences. So you started as a CBC journalist, and you decided to leave a cushy public job with the pension. So what drove that? What is the story?
My background before CBC was really community activism. I had a solid start in queer filmmaking. I worked for the Gay Film Festival as a programmer. I also sort of started out in radio and broadcasting in campus radio. So these were really great, supportive community institutions that were, volunteer or nominally paid positions, but gave you invaluable experience at storytelling and sort of understanding how the news works. Like very, journalism degrees would tell you some of that, but I was always really interested in the applied, practical versions of that. So I did manage to leverage all of those accomplishments into a gig at CBC, which was the highlight of my life. It was my dream job to be on CBC network airwaves, producing stories. And producing, of course, means, sort of you go to the pitch meeting in the morning and you say, I really think that this is an issue. This museum's having this big problem, and I think we could do a panel, and back and forth between these people, and you go chase the people, you get them on the air, it goes live the next morning. Super exciting. And you learn a lot of really important skills like doing journalism than you would facilitating meetings, of course. Mm-hmm. And a good radio journalist always says you can only up the odds. There's a magic that happens in live radio. You could take the best speakers, the most enticing and electric subject, but it could fall flat for any number of reasons. So live radio is just like, there's this, magic that it happens or it doesn't happen. And of course, meetings are being okay with uncertainty, being okay with chaos was a really good skill to cultivate. I subsequently did some hosting work as well. And that was obviously really good preparation for being at the front of the room. But what happened was I felt like I'd had this incredible opportunity to work for the network for CBC Radio. But my heart is still very much in community. And of course, a journalist has got to keep some distance. I mean, they're not your friend. They are there to tell a story. And they can't tell you, assure you that the story is always going to be favorable for you. And, you've got editors to feed and hosts and people like that. And, journalism has its tendencies, as they say, that if it bleeds, it leads, right? They're not interested always in the good news stories. So I found sometimes that I would be expected to do stories that were pretty one-sided and pretty negative. I understand that is what eyeballs are attracted to, or ears, but I felt implicated in some ways around the news cycles that were really kind of soul destroying, especially coming from a community development sort of place. And I sort of, like many people I think, started to see that, you know, this was going back to the time when the suburbs of Paris were burning. This is now, what, at least 15 years ago. Well, maybe 10. Where everyone in Toronto started saying, oh, look at that's like, oh, isn't that terrible, what the problems they have over there. And I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto and was mindful that we had huge problems around inequity, wealth distribution, marginal groups, newcomers, and people not getting the same sort of services. That we were, in fact, very close to what was happening in Paris. But luckily, weren't, you know, going through the tumult and upheaval that they were. But, you know, this is a time when people wrote stories about Scarberia instead of Scarborough, and that was considered pretty funny to a lot of people downtown. So I thought, there's this tearing apart that's happening that I could see, and I felt that I had this set of skills to help people tell stories about where they lived and how they viewed the world, that I could leverage because I'd learned it through journalism, and I sought to get back to community. So I did what very few people do, which is leave a permanent full-time job at CBC Radio as a host and producer to go and do a startup for, like, starting with $25,000 a year to start Jane's Walk, which was based on Jane Jacobs' ideas about getting people to do walking tours in their neighborhood and tell their stories. And of course, this fulfilled my desire to help people tell positive stories about where they live and to insert their perspectives on neighborhoods. Because, you know, as is often the case, you go out and, you know, you find yourself, you're in some far-flung areas and it looks like, oh, that's cool, it's a Persian bakery. Well, I wonder what, you know, what that's going to be like. And then you go in and you start talking, everyone's super friendly, and you found out a lot about, oh, this, you know, this place and their story, and everyone's really into connecting with you and talking to you and being social. And it's like, why isn't that this known story about this neighborhood? So Jane's Walk was a way of creating that connective tissue. It was very fulfilling. And so after taking a leave from CBC, I came back and said, you know what, this has been pretty good. So they were really awesome. They were like really happy for me, and we made it happen. So I went back to the community work after a pretty cool job with CBC where I got the skills. I stole the fire and brought it back to community.
That's awesome, and the communities are very lucky to have you in this capacity. So just, and going back again, is there a formative experience that really inspired you? You had an aha moment where I want to be involved in community engagement, I want to bring positive change. Was there something that happened that really sparked that?
When I was at CBC, it was the first time that I bought a house. I bought a house within 2 weeks of getting my full-time permanent papers, because of course that's what banks like, right? Now I knew it was completely precarious, but this is the only thing that a bank could relate to. So I had sort of scoped, you know, the possibilities. And so I got a house, and as soon as I owned a house, I realized, wow, I really like raking the leaves out in the front yard. I really like meeting my neighbors. So I really started to read the stuff that would come in a mailbox that I never normally would have read. And of course, some of those notices were about the development proposals being proposed, in this case for Queen Street West. And I sort of went, wow, that's pretty substantial what they're going to do. So a bunch of group of people in the neighborhood, largely sort of from the arts and social sort of sector, got engaged in the discussions around development in the neighborhood. It became known as the Queen West Triangle. The group that we created was called Active 18, which was very unusual at the time, although we didn't know, like we were sort of making it from, you know, scratch. Was we were a residents group that wasn't opposed to development. We were advocating for good design and reduced displacement. So we sort of read the tea leaves enough to go, the fix is in, stuff's going to happen. Unfortunately, you know, some housing will lost, and of course affordability would take a big hit, but can we advocate for, you know, trying to reduce the negative effects and try to get a great park in place and negotiate, you know, benefits where, you know, artist studios can be included. So this was the approach that we took that was really quite different. For the City of Toronto was really irked by it. The local councillor was taken off guard. He got the boot the next cycle. And Anna Balau came in, who, you know, I won't dwell on local politics, but she did a great job of getting to the table and dealing with. So a long process, but started a residence group. So I took an interest in city, really from literally like raking the leaves, talking to my neighbor, going, you have some hostas, you have too many of them. I would like some. I have too many of this. Would you like exchanging plants and going, wow, cities are amazing, and just being so blown away by how this process of engagement works. Of course, they were proposing buildings that were tall enough that had they fallen down, they would have hit my house. But I was outside the actual official range of people that you had to notify. So anyway,
I actually,
that's how I started.
We are, and that is actually, I'm telling this to the audience, we are joined today by people from 6 countries. So first of all, Jane, thank you for attracting such a wide range of people worldwide. That is amazing.
That's
so
cool.
Thank you for joining us from the other side of the world. I've noticed Helsinki, I've noticed Rotterdam, Tel Aviv, which is my home country or home city, and Jordan and Singapore. So thank you so much. We're very excited to have you, like super excited, trust me. So Jane, can you maybe to this wide audience explain, and I'll direct you with the question, what do you think Canada is leading in terms of community engagement, and where we can still have some room for improvement?
Oh my, that is a difficult question, because I can't say that I'm an expert on where engagement practices are at in a lot of countries. I mean, you know, as an engagement specialist like yourself, Nama, you sort of plug into conversations here and there, but it's also really fast moving, given that we're now in this COVID place and engagement is so much more in demand, and remote engagement, things like that. So why don't I actually sort of twist that a little bit and say what I see the opportunities are for improvement at this time, given we have this disruption. And so anyone in the engagement field, if they're being honest, will tell you that it's really hard to get youth, equity-seeking groups, single moms, parents of any kind, kids, let alone, to the table to weigh in on matters of land use planning, community development, because they are hard-pressed to find the time, and they're also really hard-pressed to see where their inputs made a difference. So they aren't necessarily incentivized to do that. This is a chronic condition with engagement that you can try to mitigate with incentives and recruitment and broad, you know, like as we do, make the effort. In fact, one of the projects I worked with you, Nama, was an award-winning process about family-friendly condo development, how you do that. So we actually found families to go and visit and study inside their condos, how they had hacked them. So the engagement online and digital gives us a chance to get some people who are more inclined to maybe be online. And that has in fact seemed to be the case in some of the engagement process I'm part of now. We are seeing it skewing younger. We are seeing equity seeking groups come to the table a little bit more easily, because it's a bit easier to just pop in for an hour, pop out. Of course, the digital divide is still real. So what's also really interesting is we're using the mail more than before, and it's actually getting us results. So mailing things out, receiving mail, you know, a good old fashioned phone line, which we call the hotline, you know, is working. So this is actually getting us in touch with the groups we don't, a little bit incrementally more that we don't usually hear from. So there's an opportunity, there's disruption. Why would we try to build it back the way it was? There's always shortcomings. So this is a chance to up the game. I think that's all I'll say for now.
Okay. And can you tell us who are the organizations that you work with? Like who is your client, like your typical client, and maybe share with us a recent project you've been working on.
Okay. So I work largely for public bodies like municipalities, provincial government, nonprofits, charities, and occasionally a private developer. maybe there's something about that, you know, those are the bodies that generally have money for a good, robust engagement process that, you know, you want to see it be multi-phase. You don't want to run a survey and go, thanks for sharing, I know just where to file it. That's not engagement. So you want to be able to, you know, take part and design a process that builds trust and buy-in by people, seeing that their input has been reflected and captured, you know, accurately, that you as a facilitator didn't have skin in the game in terms of, I need an outcome like this way or that, and they'll come back more. And, you know, so it tends to be government or institutional. I haven't had a pretty interesting gig that happened last year, mostly. It just wrapped up in the winter, which was to derive a design brief for a national LGBTQ monument that will be made in Ottawa. So Ottawa, our capital for everyone in Tel Aviv, and the big capital city, has a lot of monuments. There's a lot of you know, official public displays and memorials. So this will memorialize a very dark chapter in Canadian history where gays and lesbians, LGBTQ people were fired from their job in the military and from the federal civil service because they were perceived to be a security risk and a threat. So people who served proudly were, you know, fired unceremoniously, stigmatized, and drummed out of the military. It was a very painful chapter. This went on from the 50s to the 90s. Even though it was legal to be gay in Canada from 1969, the federal service and the military continued these policies of discrimination for decades longer, doing great harm. Justin Trudeau apologized in Parliament in 2017, and that represented as an apology to the victims of the purge, and came with a settlement to the people who were affected. There are still about 8,000 people alive who had been affected and made claims. And, or maybe not all of them made claims, but they know that they were affected. It was really hard for people to make claims. They didn't want to come forward. One of the projects that was established with that settlement money was several $1 million was set aside to make a monument to the LGBTQ purge, the victims, to memorialize that history, and to broadly celebrate the accomplishments, the human rights accomplishments of LGBTQ2S+ people. The question that they came to me with was, how would we devise a design brief with a robust engagement process to figure out what the educational objectives and goals of that would be? What are we memorializing? What are the key themes that we would, you know, how do you balance celebration with you know, memory and pain and marking? How do you talk to the specific of the story with, you know, the broad strokes? Of course, it will remain for the design teams who put submissions in through the RFQ and RFP process to answer those questions. But what our job as the engagement firm was to engage a broad spectrum of people through a 3-tiered process to arrive at a vision statement and a set of design priorities for this project. And it was so amazing to be part of that project, to be in a room with like these incredible like legends of queer organizing and, you know, art and design and history and academia. And then there was an indigenous circle that was just like engaging two-spirit, Inuit and Métis. And then there was a broader sort of stakeholder groups, and there's more to come as this process unfurls over the next few years. There'll be a public engagement piece. There was really thoughtful stuff about the nature of monuments. It sort of predated this, what's now happening with, you know, public monuments are highly problematic. So how will we build in our ability for history to evolve, for our understandings to evolve? So, and it was very moving because, you know, I mean, I've mentioned it enough times, I guess now, yeah, I'm queer or whatever, but it's not the only thing I am, but I had never done work in that way in my professional work in a really queer context. And it really kind of blew my mind. Like, everyone got all my jokes. I could wear whatever I wanted. I fit in. I was like, it was so weird. It's like, do straight people walk around feeling like this every day? And I think actually everyone feels a little bit out of step and a little bit odd or a little bit queer a lot of the time. But it was pretty awesome to be able to be my professional self and not worry about whether I looked a little bit too butchy for the client, you know? So that was pretty awesome. So there's a website about all that stuff. It's happening. It's an ongoing process. It was really amazing.
It sounds like a great project, and it must feel really rewarding that you can bring your own personal experiences as well into leaving something that leaves a big footprint for many generations to come.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to get into the name of your consulting practice, Department of Words and Deeds. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because I think it speaks to the fact that it's not just community engagement isn't just about words, it's actions and making deeds. So where did that come from?
So I used to just call it like Jane Farrow Consulting, but I started working with really interesting people. So the impulse to have a different name, what came from, I wanted to be able to, involve people and not feel such ownership over that I wasn't the brand. So to create a platform that people could join in and work, collaborate together on. So, I don't know if you read The New Yorker. It's a total ripoff from basically a kind of like a New Yorker thing. The short stories up front sometimes have like Department of Errors and Omissions or Department of, pop culture. Like and you just see some geeky guy with a pencil protector and, going through files and files of, Department of Complaints, It had this funny, like bureaucratic, geeky, nerdy vibe to it that I really liked. And I went Department of, and I thought, what would be my department? And I think, well, I've been a writer, I do writing, and I can't quite seem to give that up no matter how much consulting I do. It always swings back a little bit to writing. This is also like my pitch for anyone listening is the best skill you can ever develop is writing. You can sell it anywhere, and it's always in demand. Good writing, never going to go out of style. So writing was part of me, although you never really earn a lot of money doing the writing. And deeds would be something that you would hope your consulting would lead to. So it wouldn't just be sitting on a shelf collecting dust, that it would actually lead to change policy options and improvements. So to bring together, of course, words and deeds, we all know those things are related. It's like, the Department of Words and Deeds. So boom, there it was. And then I got a logo that was kind of designed on one of the beer brands that I really like, the Lost Craft beer, with the 2 arrows in the 4 quadrants. So I thought, I like this beer. It's a great logo. Could use something like that. That's it. Yeah.
So I actually have a twofold question, and the second fold is from the Q&A we're receiving from the audience. So it's really in the community engagement business or side of the process, it's really hard to make everyone happy. And you almost walk into the room and say, okay, I'm not going to make everyone happy. And for me, it's really frustrating to have, establish your day-to-day, your business, your work around something that you don't have a happy client, or maybe the client is happy, but the process is really could be frustrating. And the question we're receiving from the audience is how you deal with NIMBYism, which is, I now realize it's two completely different. There are two completely different questions, but maybe we're pressing with time to answer both.
So partly what we're trying to do, I mean, you're, as the engagement person in the middle, you're trying to create a space where everyone can speak. So everyone can be respected and everyone can be heard, seen, their comments captured. And when it comes to like the client, they're also that person. So you need, I come again and again to the defensible process phrase, right? You have to design something that everyone buys in on, basically. We actually were telling people for 6 weeks, we need your comments. There was 7 meetings, there was many invites. These were the 20 ways that we invited you. So once they say, I never heard about it, you can fall back and go, well, these are the ways, and it's on the website, so it's defensible. You may not have engaged, but it was defensible. Likewise, you might not agree with what the outcome is, but it's defensible because the people who came forward said, I don't want anything that looks like those buildings over there, and I don't want I don't want anyone new to come to my neighborhood. I don't want those people to come to my neighborhood. These are not my problems to solve. I don't want anything to change. That is not in the purview of people to really speak to. Yes, they can elect officials who represent that kind of stasis, but generally you just can't tell a city to stop growing. But there should be many opportunities in the process to explain how development works, how approvals work, and they need to be felt, they need to be heard, they need to be captured. So the job of the facilitator and good engagement is to, you know, allow the developer to be able to point to what they're, to explain their priorities. Certain amount of it is making a bottom line. Like I have worked for a few developers on small little parts of their projects, and I've done it insisting that we be able to publish the notes publicly of what the input was. So sometimes it get a little bit edgy. It's like, oh, it's like, don't worry. If you can't write down what people said politely, it's not verbatim, you know, capturing the essence, then they won't trust the process. But it wouldn't surprise anyone to know that someone might show up to your meetings or your workshops and say, I have, you know, big problems with all of this. You just simply write it down. Because it has been captured in a report does not mean that the developer has their marching orders. So they need, and they will be given the opportunity to respond and go, as the priorities in this neighborhood and the planning priorities of the city and the priorities for growth in this area and the transit-oriented development, they'll have many opportunities to explain why they're doing what they're doing, but they have to listen. And we have to capture it accurately. And in the best scenario, at least buy some buy-in to the process. And if people disagree in the end, they can at least say, well, I really don't like the outcome, but I understand why it's happening. So no one likes new railway to, you know, lines going in their backyard, but everyone complains about congestion. Not everyone's going to be happy. Regional express rail is a reality. It's got to happen. And maybe in some cases, the best you can ever do is, I don't like the end result, but I understand the process and I took part in it, but I still hate you. Oh, well, maybe that's the best we can do.
We are receiving another question from the audience that I think, and it actually relates to things we talked about. How can you ensure that the process is real and avoid, you know, just a wash, just a tokenism of engagement? And have you ever worked with anyone that the process was in vain?
Nama, you know what? I couldn't help but look at the comments, so I spaced out totally during your question. How rude is that?
So you can actually see the last question. I will ask the question again. Have you ever had how you avoid or how you ensure the process of engagement is real and actually being taken into account?
Well, it's the old what's up for influence question, right? You want to get as clear a statement from the client, the city, the municipality, the ministry or whatever, that they are actually going to use the input. And when you can sincerely show that, that's why you want a multi-phased process, then you can you know, build that trust in the process. It will increase the quality of the input that you get. So I don't know how to really, that's the basic formula. If they're just going through the motions and ticking it off, people smell it from a mile away and they'll stay away. So the clients, the sponsoring group, you know, people gathering the input have to show how it's been used. I mean, often, let's be honest, like people know that generally improvements in walkability have to occur with every single, you know, project at this point. When you're talking land use planning, I mean, we would be a complete idiot to say that you didn't have to think about safely getting people across the streets and, you know, bike lane transportation and so on. But it behooves us all to not come out first and go, this is what we're going to do. Just wait until the community says it. Dollars to donuts, they're going to say it. and then away you go. Now you've got a justification for being able to say, we've listened, we've heard. It seems to be, instead of coming out and go, we know right away that y'all want bike lanes. Why would you even do that? It's pretty much going to happen. So, and in that process, you're demonstrating you are listening. Now, if everyone came out and said they don't want bike lanes and the project was still committed to it, they might still do it anyway. It's not like they're waiting for all their marching orders, right? But, you know, so just, if we can over time establish, you know, a better record of you know, listening and showing it in the signs and reflecting it, but also, you know, building the capacity of people from the city and the development team to make the bold and brash decisions. It's really hard for them to stand up and go, we need more affordable housing, and that means we're gonna go up a few more floors. We all know that makes common sense, and I'm trying to get them the granular input from people and communities that support that. And sometimes that's not as simple as, you can't say, go into a park and show me where you want the swing set and the benches and the splash pad. That's not going to help a designer. Designers need to know, you know, what's really sad is, like, when I go through the park, I never want to stop because, or I don't like the park because it feels too clean. It feels too, you know, shiny. This is actually input that designers want. They're like, oh, how incredibly interesting. They only linger in places where they feel welcome, make it more of a living room than a formal playroom. And like, people just saying, I know this is how many stories I want, doesn't actually help. I know that's some part of the planning process, but really what they want to know is, how do you want to live in a community? What makes it livable? What makes it connected? And then when people realize, well, if you put all those things in the box, when they're like, it looks a little bit more like that, at least maybe we've got a fighting chance to show that affordable housing doesn't come from, you know, single family units with big driveways. We all want this affordable city. We all want to apparently pick up our dry cleaning and get tacos. Well, where do you think they're going to live? So there's a literacy component to all good engagement that can also go back and forth, a co-learning component that people say, and this is what it's like to live here, and I can't get across the street. So we all have something to learn, and we all have something to say.
Is there a private project engagement process that you can point to that's just, they did a phenomenal job of engaging the community and taking into account all of the input? Anything that comes to mind?
That's a tough question, Lirad. You should be on CBC radio asking in those hard questions. You know, what's a perfect client? Is there a perfect client? Is there a perfect project? No, I mean, these are things complicated. I mean, like I said, Nam and I worked on the guidelines, but what have become design guidelines for family-friendly condos. That was incredibly rewarding. It got a Canadian Institute of Planners Award for being innovative in its engagement strategy. You know, when people see like irrefutable, that is awesome. That totally makes sense. It totally passes the smell test. You're gonna probably see change. So just make sure your findings and recommendations are legit. They're grounded in real people, lived experience, well researched. You know, people do have an imagination. They want to. People generally want to do the right thing. You know.
For people who want, you know, they want to start working on their own, start something that is meaningful in the development industry. What could be your advice, your word of wisdom?
I think that, you know, what I learned being part of Activate Team, you know, I was a resident who had a beef about what was going to go on in the neighborhood. As a journalist, I wanted to get to the bottom of why things are happening. Why has this decision been made? I worked at the City Hall as a city staffer for a year as an executive assistant, and that was brutal. So you're getting the constituents call going, I'm telling you right now, I need that parking spot and I need it now. And like, that's like, wow, how much work at City Hall is about parking spaces would curl your toes. So it's like, see it from their point, like they are super hard. That's very hard work. And then, so journalist, activist, an EA, and then as a facilitator, and then city staffers who are beholden to so many different people, the accountability. So I think that whatever you want to create, recognize that you will do a much better job if you have an appreciation for the incredible depth and complexity of relationships in the room. Make space for everyone. Give everyone their humanity, you know, like, and, you know, I mean, if your question was about developers specifically, like, but, you know, coax them, give them the data that they need to have the confidence to stand up and say, and this is why we're going to do this. I know why. It's so much easier for them to not do it and be safe, to be bold, give them the data they need, show who weighed in on the project, from where, and give them the confidence that they have the backing, that this wasn't just like the squeaky wheels who only ever show up and say no, no, no to everything. Make sure you get great people in the room, so that's a complexity and variety of opinions are at least present. And you know, like, support them with good engagement in the same way that you're supporting the community by being inclusive and transparent. So work hard to get a lot of perspectives in the mix. Hope that helps.
Lirad, do you want to ask? We have time for a last question that we ask all our speakers. Lirad?
Yeah, so we ask all of our speakers if you can suggest a book that's been particularly impactful in your life. What would that be? I think it's sitting on your desk right now. So
I just had a couple of them. So maybe people know Adam Schultz. Like, I'm into canoeing, and I like, you know, wilderness, like Canadian, like, so it's basically Shackleton, the Canadian edition, right? Like, it is staggering to see, you know, in terms of like people that get focused on an idea and they get very, very committed, and what that brings out of the leadership, bravery, courage, persistence, all that stuff. This is the book about the history of Canada in 10 maps. Fantastic. You know, Adam basically crossed the Arctic in a canoe alone. Insane. But also, I love vernacular. I love little stories. So this is a book I helped write, which is called Any Other Way. It's about how Toronto got queer, 100 stories and anecdotes that would have been lost to the dust of time, like, largely. Some of them pretty small deeds, but really important, like, you know, lesbian co-housing. You know, we all kind of lived together and shared the kitty litter and dish duties, and there was vegans very, very early on, people. Important history. So they're heroes in their own little small way too. So be fierce, be brave. Those are stories that I really love. I'll never get enough of.
That's amazing. I will share the links to the books in our recap email. For those of you who joined us from the other side of the world, now it's night time, and so thank you very much for being here. By the way, there are questions that weren't answered, so I promise I will email those questions to Jane, so she could at least see what she was asked. Thank you, everyone. Jane, thank you. It was one of the most fascinating conversations ever. Thank you. We'll see you next week. Have a nice rest of the week. Bye, Jane.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Take
Bye,
care, everyone.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.